Today's horror manga dubbed Narration is Mountains of God by Junji Ito. If you enjoy the video at any point in time, please do not hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Anyways, without further ado, let's get right into this chilling tale. Mount H 9 months ago.
What a lucky day. The three of us got such a nice big room.
Yeah, it's nice to have time to relax. Let's all introduce ourselves.
My name is Azumi. I love hiking, especially for the sake and delicacies you get at the foot of each hill.
I'm Tenno. Taking photos in the mountains is my hobby. My name's Ishida. I've climbed the Eiger and the Alps.
Wow, were you in any dangerous situations?
Yes, quite a few times actually.
Is that so? Oh, speaking of dangerous situations, have you heard of the supernatural accidents on Mount H?
Ah, I've heard of them.
What happened that one time was terrible. Oh, the manager.
The victim was a lady in her 50s who was hiking alone.
That day I saw her off first thing in the morning.
She often hiked for fitness and was therefore a very experienced hiker. Before she left, she told me she was only going for a short hike on Mount H. But by sunset, she hadn't returned. It was very sunny that day, and there were lots of other hikers around. So, any accident shouldn't have gone unnoticed. But none of the hikers had seen her. Then, the next morning, she was spotted deep in a ravine, her body mangled, blood dripping everywhere, and her clothes stained with that crimson red. The scene of the accident was a small space surrounded by slopes with winding trails on top. On either side of the ridges of those slopes are steep drops into the valley below, one of which the lady fell into. While the death may seem straightforward, the area the lady had fallen into cannot be reached even when one walks many meters off the hiking trail. The people who collected her body suspected she may have committed suicide. I also considered that possibility. But I remember her being very cheerful before she left. It didn't seem like she'd take her own life. Her family also found the notion of suicide unbelievable, but in the end, the case was closed. Perhaps she was overly fatigued and didn't pay attention to where she was going. Or she may have been blown off by a strong wind.
But haven't we all taken that path before? It isn't an area that had strong winds. Besides, like the manager, I'm getting confused. How could she have deliberately fallen into a snow-filled valley?
Maybe she was pushed by someone?
You've been watching too many suspense dramas, right?
The two of them looked over at him. I've somewhat remembered something from before.
Did something happen to you?
Yes. It was about 5 years ago in early August. During the peak of summer, I decided to hike the Hida Mountains. That day, I left the hut and headed toward Mount Amida. Hikers that had patiently waited for monsoon season to end flooded the trails. He continued down the pathway, making his way up the mountain and following the hikers. Once I round this boulder, I'll reach the ridge trail, huh? And so, he made his way around the boulder, but to his dismay, no one's here. Are they all experienced hikers? Even though I was quite close to the others, I became alone all of a sudden. It seemed like I had reached an area of clean air turbulence. But then, the wind picked up. Ah, what a nice wind. I think today's lunch will be tasty. But that was when I noticed a silhouette in the distance. As the wind picked up, the figure got closer and closer. This person is really slim. Continued to approach. I thought to myself, the person is smiling. It's great to travel from afar to hike. That person must be enjoying this hike a lot. Seeing them happy makes me happy too. I can't help smiling as well. I suppose I'll say hi when we meet. But then, there was something off about him. At that moment, I suddenly felt an extremely cold sensation. As he continued to get closer and closer, I noticed there was something wrong with him. No. That's not a smile. As he looked closer at the man, he noticed his intense grimace, his teeth gritting, and veins forming on his forehead, not to mention that he had no pupils. His eyes were completely white. That man wasn't smiling. He was staring at me with immense hatred. What surprised me most were the man's footsteps. The steps he took and the speed at which he moved forward didn't match at all. He approached me rapidly with that horrible facial expression. He wasn't of this world. I ran as fast as I could, but he quickly tailed behind me. I tumbled to the ground, but when I looked behind me, any traces of that man had disappeared. Who was he? The breath that he released with each chuckle had the smell of death. This memory came back to me today when I checked out the scene of the accident while heading down Mount H. Could it be that that lady encountered the same man that I did? But if that's the case, wouldn't she have been saved if she turned back like I did?
Could that man have been a spirit? Like an evil demon? How creepy.
Speaking of creepy stories, I also have an eerie experience.
Oh, what is it?
Well, it happened many years ago, on my winter trip to the Mount in the Northern Alps to photograph stars. In order to take pictures of a clear sky full of stars, I hiked from the plateau on Mount N to a hut on the mountain's cliff. Everything seemed fine when I started the hike, but the sky soon grew cloudy. After passing Hut R, I decided I needed to stop for a rest. I pitched a tent in a crevice and had dinner. When I waited for nightfall, I took pictures for over 4 hours. I finally packed up my camera when it was after midnight. I went to bed just before 1 a.m. But then that was when I heard footsteps in the snow. I awoke.
Footsteps? At such a late hour? No one should be hiking at this time.
But the steps got closer and closer toward me, until it was right outside my tent.
It must be something not of this world. 2 hands went right against my tent, and I screamed. They got even closer to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. To make matters worse, then I saw a face at the bottom of the tent, and it began to form what looked like a smile. It got closer and closer to me. It seemed like there was nothing I could do, but that was when I heard a creaking from behind me. I quickly turned around and there was another face. In that instant, as it surrounded me, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Ah! And then I quickly ducked down, grabbing my headlamp, clicking the switch and shining the light at it. Whatever it was began to screech in pain. And then it was gone. I shined my headlamp everywhere, but nothing appeared to be there. Sweat dripped down my brow as I shivered in fright. The next morning, I gave up on the photographic trip. I packed up my tent and left for End Plateau as quickly as possible. I still don't know what it was, but Ishida, thinking back, the face that was pressed against the tent exactly matches your description of the sneering man. It's just that there were two of them at the time. Two of them, eh? That must be it. What is it? Might have been that during the lady's accident that day.
The man began to imagine the events of that night. That poor lady scaling up the escarpment until she saw a silhouette in the distance. It was that skinny man slowly approaching her with what looked like a smile, until seeing that horrific sneer, veins pulsing out of his forehead. She screamed and ran as fast as she could, but when she turned around, she realized there was an identical clone. Then, having nowhere to go, she screamed for help until she realized the two of them were quickly approaching her. She yelled for them to stay away, but then as she looked back, she saw that horrible ravine. There was nowhere to go, and those two men were right in front of her. They pushed her, and she fell to a horrible, horrific doom. That's just my imagination, but there seems to be a lot of things in the mountain that we don't know about. The three of them listened in fear. Nah, let's stop this. Sorry for making you bring up all those eerie stories. No, I was the one that started this. Please forget what I said. Sorry I brought up my story. Everything's fine, everyone, since you're all leaving the mountain tomorrow. As the manager of this hostel, I'll be staying here for the rest of the season. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I'd like to take this time to give a very special thanks to my Patreons and YouTube members. Sarah de Jesus, Motosurf, Cleo, Dason Animus, Ali Wei, Pteranodon Girl 1, and Minue. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, you're important and you matter. Have a good night, everyone. Goodbye.